I'm Althea Brooks, 82 years old, a woman they once called ugly, a high school graduate whose own family cut me off like I was an embarrassment. That word embarrassment, it hangs in the air for a moment even now, 64 years later, like the stale scent of mothballs in a long-shuttered closet. You'd think a word would lose its power over time, that its edges would soften and its poison would dilute. But some words are branded on you. They become a part of your history, a shadow that walks behind you even on the sunniest of days. My life now is filled with sunshine. I live in a sturdy brick house with a garden out back that is my pride and joy. My roses, they win ribbons at the county fair. My grandchildren's laughter echoes in these halls, their sticky fingerprints a testament to a love so fierce and unconditional it can bring me to tears. I built this life brick by brick, rose by rose, laugh by laugh. But it was a life built on a foundation of rejection, a life that began the day my own blood told me I wasn't worthy of being seen with them. It wasn't a sudden thing, it was a slow poison administered in small doses throughout my childhood. My mother, Martha Me, was a woman carved from hard opinions and societal expectations. In her eyes, a woman's worth was measured by the tilt of her chin, the fairness of her skin, and the quality of the man she could attract. And she was blessed with a daughter who fit that mold perfectly, my sister Delphine. Delphine was born 2 years after me, and it was as if she'd stolen all the beauty the good Lord had intended to share between us. She had my mother's light, bright skin, her easy smile, and hair that fell in soft waves without any coaxing. I was me. My skin was the color of rich earth after a rain, my features were strong where hers were delicate, and my hair was a tight, proud crown that refused to be tamed. My mother called it nappy, her voice always laced with a sigh of disappointment. I remember our shared birthday party when I was 8 and she was 6. It was in our small backyard in Birmingham. The neighborhood children were there playing tag around the big oak tree. My mother brought out the gifts. For Delphine, there was a beautiful porcelain doll with blue eyes and yellow hair dressed in a lace gown. The girls all gathered around, cooing with delight. Then my mother handed me my gift. It was a box wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside were a pair of sturdy, sensible brown shoes. For school, my mother said, not looking at me, your old ones are a disgrace. I remember the hot shame that pricked my eyes. I didn't want sensible shoes. I wanted something beautiful just once, but beauty was Delphine's territory. Mine was practicality, disgrace. It was the same every Sunday. As we prepared for church, our little house would be a flurry of activity. My mother would spend an hour on Delphine's hair, pressing it straight with a hot comb that sizzled and smoked, filling the kitchen with the scent of burnt hair and pomade. She'd dress her in frilly dresses with satin sashes. When she was done, she'd turn to me, her face a mask of weary resignation. Althea, stand up straight. For goodness sake, child, try to smile. You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. I did. The weight of her disappointment was a physical burden, heavy and constant. In church, she would parade Delphine down the aisle, accepting compliments on her behalf while I trailed behind, invisible. The years leading up to my graduation were the worst. Delphine was in her mid-teens, blossoming, collecting beaux like she collected compliments. Boys would call the house for her, their clumsy, hopeful voices echoing through the line. My mother would preen. That's the Henderson boy, she'd whisper. His father owns the hardware store. She spoke of Delphine's future as if it were a foregone conclusion, a grand pageant just waiting for its queen. My future was spoken of in hushed, worried tones. We'll have to find a charitable boy to take you to the spring dance, my mother said once, not to me but to my father over dinner. My father, a quiet man who was worn down by life and by my mother's sharp tongue, just grunted in response. He loved me, I think, in his own silent way, but he never stood up for me. It was easier to let Martha Me have her way. I didn't go to the spring dance. The idea of some poor boy being guilted into taking me was more humiliating than staying home alone. So I stayed in my room and listened to the radio, pretending I was the girl in the songs, the one who was loved and cherished, the one who was beautiful. But I knew even then that I was not that girl. And as my graduation day approached, the final, most bitter dose of my mother's poison was yet to be administered. Graduation Day, June 4th, 1961, a day that for most girls is a pinnacle of hope and celebration. For me, it was the day the floor fell out from under. My world, the air in Birmingham, was already thick with the promise of a sweltering summer, but a small, determined breeze whispered through the window of the room I shared with Delphine. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of excitement. I had finished high school, I had worked hard, my grades were good, and I had a diploma with my name on it, Althea Collins. It was mine. No one could take that from me. I had saved for months, using money from darning socks and cleaning for one of our neighbors to buy the fabric for my graduation dress. It was a simple pattern, an A-line dress with a modest neckline, but the fabric was a lovely shade of pale yellow like sunshine on buttermilk. I wasn't a master seamstress, but I had poured every ounce of my concentration into that dress. The seams were straight, the hem was even. When I put it on that morning, I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror on our wall and I didn't feel ugly. I just felt like me, Althea, a graduate. I walked into the kitchen, the yellow fabric swishing around my knees. My mother was at the stove frying bacon. Delphine was at the table, painting her fingernails a shocking shade of coral pink. The smell of bacon grease and nail polish remover warred in the air. My mother turned, spatula in hand, and her eyes swept over me. Her face, which had been set in its usual morning grimness, tightened further. A little muscle in her jaw twitched. "What in God's name are you wearing?" she asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. "It's my graduation dress," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. The flicker of excitement I'd felt was dying, sputtering out like a candle in a draft. Delphine looked up from her nails, blowing on them gently. She gave a little tinkling laugh, a sound that always made me feel like a clumsy animal. "Oh, Thea, that color does you no favors. It makes your skin look muddy." "It's yellow," I said, my hands clenching at my sides. "It's a happy color." "Happiness is for people who have something to be happy about," my mother snapped. "You look like a sad, lumpy lemon. Go take it off." "But it's all I have," I pleaded. "Graduation is in 2 hours." "Then I suppose you'll be wearing your Sunday dress," she said, turning back to the stove as if the conversation was over. My Sunday dress was a drab navy blue, a hand-me-down that had once been Delphine's. It was too tight in the shoulders and too short in the waist. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and thick. "No, I made this, I'm wearing this." My mother slammed the spatula down on the counter. The clang echoed in the small kitchen. She turned to face me, her eyes narrowed to slits. "You will not embarrass this family, Althea. Do you hear me? People will be there, the Hendersons, Pastor Brown and his wife. Do you think I want them to see my daughter looking like some pitiful charity case in a homemade dress that color?" "What's wrong with the color?" I cried, the words tumbling out. "What's wrong with me? Why do you hate me so much?" "Hate you?" she laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, child, don't be so dramatic. I don't hate you. I am simply a realist. I see what you are, and what you are is a burden. Delphine, she will marry well. She will bring honor to this family. You will be an anchor around our necks. We have to look out for our future, for Delphine's future. And you in that dress at that ceremony, you are a liability." The cruelty of it stole my breath. It was so casual, so matter-of-fact. I wasn't her daughter. I was a line item on a balance sheet, a debit in the column of her social standing. "So you're not coming?" I asked, my voice trembling. Delphine capped her nail polish bottle with a decisive click. "Of course we're not coming," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Honestly, Thea, it would be too humiliating. Everyone will be looking at you." They didn't go. My father had already left for work, escaping the storm he knew was brewing. So I walked the mile and a half to the high school auditorium alone in my yellow dress. The sun beat down, and with every step I felt their words clinging to me like tar: sad, lumpy lemon, embarrassment, liability. I sat through the ceremony in a daze. I heard my name called, Althea Collins. I walked across the stage, took the diploma from the principal, and shook his hand. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, and all I could think was that they were all seeing what my mother saw. When I looked out into the crowd, I saw the Hendersons. I saw Pastor Brown and his wife. I saw empty seats where my family should have been. The walk home was even longer. When I opened the front door, my diploma clutched in my sweaty hand. My mother and Delphine were sitting in the living room. They were dressed up. Delphine was in a new dress, a lovely floral print. My mother was wearing her good pearls. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Oh, we're going to the Hendersons for tea," my mother said coolly. A little celebration. Their son James graduated with honors. It was the final, twisting turn of the knife. They weren't just absent from my celebration, they were actively celebrating someone else's child, someone worthy. That night, after they had returned, full of chatter about the fine sandwiches and the lovely things Mrs. Henderson had said about Delphine, my mother called me into the kitchen. Althea, she began, not meeting my eyes, we need to talk about your future. I waited, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. I have a cousin in Montgomery, she said. She has a daughter who just had a baby. She needs a live-in girl to help with the baby, the cleaning. She can't pay much, but she'll give you a room and board. As she was sending me away, she was casting me out. So that's it, I said, the numbness giving way to a strange, cold clarity. You're just getting rid of me. I am providing for you, she corrected, her voice sharp. It's the best anyone can expect for you. You are 18 now. It is time you stopped being a burden on this family. You'll pack your things. The bus leaves tomorrow morning. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I simply turned and walked back to my room. I looked at the yellow dress which I had hung carefully on the back of the door. I took it down, folded it, and placed it in my small cardboard suitcase. I packed my few other belongings, 2 other dresses, my worn-out shoes, my Bible, and my diploma. The next morning, my father drove me to the bus station in silence. He pressed a $10 bill into my hand as I was about to board. His eyes were sad, but he said nothing. I looked at him, my own father, a man who had watched my spirit be crushed day after day and had not lifted a finger. I didn't say goodbye. I got on the bus and I did not look back. I was not going to Montgomery to be some cousin's maid. I was going anywhere else. I was going to disappear from their lives just as they had demanded. If I was an embarrassment, then they would never have to be embarrassed by me again. The bus smelled of stale cigarettes and weary travelers. I watched Birmingham shrink in the window until it was just a smudge on the horizon, and then it was gone. With it went everything I had ever known, the oppressive weight of my mother's disapproval, the sting of my sister's scorn, the suffocating silence of my father. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. I had my suitcase, my diploma, and the $10 my father had pressed into my palm. I was a ship cut loose from its moorings in the middle of a storm. I didn't have a plan, the bus was heading north and that was all that mattered. I rode for hours, the rhythmic hum of the engine a strange sort of lullaby. At some point I must have fallen asleep, my head resting against the cool glass of the window. When I awoke, it was dark outside and the bus was pulling into a station in a city whose name I didn't know. A sign flickered under a street lamp, Nashville. I got off the bus. The air was different here, cooler, filled with the distant, melancholic sound of a guitar. I had nowhere to go. I walked for what felt like hours, my suitcase growing heavier with each step, the city lights blurring through my tired eyes. I was just a girl, 18 years old, with no one and nothing. The fear was a living thing inside me, a cold knot in my stomach. My mother's voice echoed in my head, "You will be a burden," was she right? Was I doomed to be a stray, dependent on the charity of strangers? It was past midnight when I saw a small, hand-painted sign in the window of a tall, narrow brick house. Rooms for rent, women only, inquire within. A dim light glowed in a downstairs window. It looked safe. It looked like a haven. Summoning the last of my courage, I walked up the 3 stone steps and knocked on the heavy wooden door. After a moment, the door creaked open, and a woman stood there, silhouetted by the light from the hallway. She was tall and broad-shouldered, with skin the color of dark molasses. She wore a simple house dress and a wrap around her hair. Her face was stern, etched with lines that spoke of a life that had not been easy. "It's the middle of the night, child," she said, her voice a low rumble. "What do you want?" I saw your sign," I stammered, my suitcase bumping against my leg. "I need a room." She looked me up and down, her gaze sharp and assessing. She took in my simple dress, my worn-out shoes, my frightened eyes. I braced myself for rejection, for the door to be shut in my face. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" she asked. I shook my head, tears threatening to spill over. "No, ma'am, just on my own." She was silent for a long moment, just studying me. Then she sighed, a deep, weary sound, and stepped back. "Well, come on and out of the night. You can't just stand on my doorstep. The world will eat you alive." Her name was Hattie Beaumont, Ms. Hattie S. He was the owner of the boarding house, a place she ran with an iron fist and a surprisingly soft heart. She led me to a small, clean room on the third floor. It had a narrow bed, a small dresser, a single window that looked out onto an alley, and a wash basin in the corner. To me, it was a palace. It was safety. It was mine. Rent is $3 a week, she said, her arms crossed over her ample chest. Payable on Friday, no men upstairs, no noise after 10. You break the rules, you're out, you understand. I nodded vigorously. Yes, ma'am, thank you, ma'am. I opened my suitcase and took out the $10 bill. It was almost all the money I had in the world. I handed her $3. She took the money and tucked it into her apron pocket. There's a cafe round the corner. They're always looking for dishwashers. You go there first thing in the morning, tell 'em Hattie sent you. And just like that, I had a home and the prospect of a job. Ms. Hattie was my first taste of a different kind of womanhood than the one I had known. She wasn't concerned with beauty or social standing. She valued strength, resilience, and hard work. She had built her own world within the walls of that boarding house, a sanctuary for women like me who were trying to find their footing. The first few months were the hardest. I washed dishes until my hands were raw and chapped. I came home every night exhausted, the smell of grease and stale food clinging to my clothes. I ate my meals alone in my small room, usually just bread and cheese. Loneliness was a constant companion, a dull ache in my chest. I missed my father sometimes, his quiet presence a comfort I hadn't appreciated until it was gone. I did not miss my mother or my sister. The wound they had inflicted was too fresh, a gaping hole that I didn't know how to begin to mend. But slowly, things began to change. I started to talk to the other women in the boarding house. They were all running from something or running toward something. There was Clara, a young widow trying to raise her son. There was Sarah, who had left a cruel husband. We were a collection of broken pieces, but together we formed a strange, supportive community. Ms. Hattie became my mentor. She saw something in me, a spark of determination that my own mother had been blind to. She taught me how to budget my meager earnings, how to carry myself with confidence, how to look a man in the eye and not flinch. You stand up straight, Althea, she'd tell me, but her voice wasn't laced with criticism like my mother's. It was a command, an instruction on how to survive. You let him know you ain't no pushover. Your spine is made of steel, child. You just gotta learn how to use it. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, I was sitting in the communal kitchen, feeling lower than a snake's belly. Ms. Hattie came in and sat down across from me. You know, she said, a body can't live on dish soap and misery. You got any other talents, girl? I thought for a moment. I can sew a little, and my grandmother taught me how to bake before she passed. Cakes, pies. Miss Hattie's eyes lit up. Baking, now that's a talent, that's a gift. You bring joy to people with baking. The next day, she gave me $2 from her own pocket. You go buy flour, sugar, butter, she ordered. You bake me a cake, a sweet potato pie too. Let's see what you can do. That weekend, for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of that old excitement. I bought the ingredients, and the boarding house kitchen was filled with the warm, comforting sense of cinnamon, nutmeg, and melting butter. I baked a sweet potato pie, the crust flaky and golden, the filling rich and smooth. I baked a simple butter cake. I poured all my loneliness, all my fear, and all my hope into that baking. When Miss Hattie tasted the pie, she closed her eyes. A slow smile spread across her stern face. Child, she said, her voice soft with wonder, you didn't just learn to bake, you were born to bake. That night, she cut up the cake and pie and shared it with all the boarders. For the first time, I was the provider of something beautiful, something celebrated. It was a feeling more satisfying than any compliment on a pretty dress could ever be. I was not a liability, I was a baker. And my new life, a life of my own making, had truly begun. The kitchen in Miss Hattie's boarding house became my sanctuary and my laboratory. I spent every spare moment there, my hands dusted with flour, my mind focused on the alchemy of sugar, butter, and eggs. I started small, baking for my fellow boarders on weekends. Soon, word got around the neighborhood. People from the local church started asking for cakes for their bake sales. The owner of the cafe where I washed dishes tasted my lemon pound cake and asked if I would bake 2 a week for him to sell by the slice. He paid me more for those 2 cakes than I made in 3 days of washing dishes. With every cup. Key I sold, I felt a piece of myself being rebuilt. My mother had taught me that my worth was in my face. Ms. Hattie and my newfound customers were teaching me that it was in my hands. It was in the care I took with my ingredients, the patience I had with my dough, the joy I felt when someone's eyes lit up after their first bite. I was creating something good and sweet in a world that had shown me so much bitterness. One Saturday afternoon, I was delivering a caramel cake to the church for their annual picnic. A young man was there helping to set up tables. He was tall and lanky, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that seemed to reach all the way up to them. He saw me struggling with the heavy cake carrier and rushed over. "Here, let me help you with that," he said, his voice warm and steady. "That looks heavy, and it smells like heaven." "Thank you," I said, a blush creeping up my neck. I wasn't used to men being so openly kind to me. "I'm Joseph," he said, taking the carrier and placing it carefully on the dessert table. "Joseph Brooks." "Althea Collins," I replied. He looked at me, really looked at me, and his smile didn't falter. He didn't seem to notice that my skin was dark or that my features weren't delicate. He just saw me. "Well, Althea Collins," he said, "I have a feeling your cake is going to be the star of this picnic." He was right. The cake was gone in under an hour, and Joseph made sure to get the first slice. He sought me out afterwards, his plate clean. "I have to confess," he said, "I may have told a few people that was the best caramel cake in the entire state of Tennessee. I hope you don't mind." I didn't mind. Joseph was a mechanic, a quiet, hardworking man who saw the world in a straightforward way. He saw a problem and he fixed it. He saw goodness and he appreciated it. He started finding excuses to be wherever I was. He'd show up at the cafe for a slice of my pound cake. He'd offer to walk me home from church. He never showered me with flowery compliments about my appearance. Instead, he'd say things like, "Althea, you have such a steady hand," or "You have a knack for making people feel cared for." He was complimenting my soul, not my shell. Our courtship was gentle and slow, like a flower unfurling in the morning sun. He told me about his family, his dreams of one day owning his own auto repair shop. I, in turn, told him my story. I told him about my mother in Delphine, about the yellow dress and the empty chairs at my graduation. I told him everything, expecting the pity or disgust that I had always feared. He just listened, his expression serious. When I was finished, my voice thick with unshed tears, he reached across the table and took my hand. His was calloused and stained with grease, but it was the safest hand I had ever held. "Your mother was a fool, Althea," he said simply. "She was blind. She had a diamond in her house and threw it away because she thought it was a common stone." In that moment, a deep, painful knot inside me began to loosen. To be seen, truly seen and valued after a lifetime of being overlooked and dismissed, it was like the first rain after a long drought. Joseph Brooks and I were married a year later in a small ceremony at the very church where we had met. Miss Hattie stood up for me as my mother should have. She wore a proud, fierce smile. I wore a simple cream-colored dress that I had sewn myself, and I carried a bouquet of yellow roses. I had reclaimed the color. It was no longer the color of my humiliation, it was the color of my hope. Our first few years of marriage were lean but happy. We lived in a small apartment above a grocery store. Joseph worked long hours at the garage, and I took my baking business to the next level. With a loan from the bank, co-signed by Ms. Hattie, I started a small-scale catering service out of our tiny kitchen, specializing in desserts for weddings and parties. I named it Althea's Sweets. 2 years after we were married, our son Samuel was born. And 2 years after that, our daughter Sarah. Holding my children in my arms, I made a silent vow. They would never, for 1 second of their lives, doubt that they were loved. They would never be judged by the color of their skin, the texture of their hair, or the shape of their face. I would fill our home with so much love and acceptance that there would be no room for the kind of poison I had grown up with. Joseph was a wonderful father, patient and doting. He taught Samuel how to fix things, and he told Sarah she could be anything she wanted to be: an astronaut or a doctor or the president. Our home was filled with laughter, the smell of baking, and the certainty of unconditional love. The life I was living was a quiet, profound act of rebellion against the one my mother had predicted for me. I was not a burden. I was a wife, a mother, a business owner. I was the heart of a loving family. I was Althea Brooks, and I was happy. The years flowed by like a steady, peaceful river. My little business, Althea's Sweets, grew beyond my wildest dreams. What started in my tiny apartment kitchen blossomed into a full-fledged bakery and cafe on the main street of our town. Joseph finally realized his dream, too, opening Brooks Auto Repair right next door. We were a team in life and in business. Our days were long and filled with hard work, but our nights were filled with the satisfaction of building something that was ours. The bakery became a cornerstone of the community. People didn't just come for the pies and cakes, they came for the comfort, the sense of welcome. The bell above the door would jingle, and in would walk neighbors for their morning coffee, mothers treating their children after school, young couples on first dates sharing a slice of strawberry rhubarb pie. I knew their names, their stories, their joys, and their sorrows. In a way, the entire town became the family I never had. I made sure my own children, Samuel and Sarah, grew up understanding the value of hard work and the importance of kindness. They spent their afternoons after school in the bakery, doing their homework in a back booth, the air thick with the scent of yeast and sugar. I taught Sarah how to braid challah bread, and I taught Samuel how to calculate inventory. But the most important lesson I taught them was the one my mother had failed to teach me, that their worth was inherent and unconditional. I remember Sarah coming home from middle school one day, her face troubled. A girl in her class had made fun of her glasses. She'd called her four eyes. I sat her down at our kitchen table, the same way Joseph had sat with me all those years ago. I took her face in my hands. "Sarah, my love," I said, looking her straight in her beautiful, bespectacled eyes. "Some people are like small, dark rooms. They can't see anything clearly and they want to pull you into the darkness with them. But you, my daughter, you are a house full of windows and sunshine. Don't ever let anyone convince you to board up your windows. Your glasses help you see the world more clearly. That's a superpower, not a flaw." She hugged me tightly, and I knew she understood. We raised our children to be strong in their own skin, to be proud of who they were. They grew into remarkable adults. Samuel became an architect, designing buildings that were both beautiful and functional. Sarah became a teacher, shaping young minds with the same compassion and wisdom I had tried to give her. They both married wonderful people and gave me four grandchildren, the absolute lights of my life. Joseph and I grew old together. We saw our children succeed, we welcomed our grandchildren, and we continued to run our businesses side by side. The years softened him, turning his dark hair to a distinguished silver. They softened me too, etching laugh lines around my eyes and mouth. He was my rock, my partner, my greatest champion. His love was a constant, gentle warmth that had healed the coldest corners of my heart. He passed away 7 years ago. A sudden heart attack, quick and peaceful, they said. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that left me breathless. The whole town mourned with me. The bakery was closed for a week, and the front door was buried in bouquets of flowers and cards from people whose lives we had touched. My children, my rocks now, stayed with me, held me, and reminded me of the incredible life he and I had built together. After he was gone, I sold the bakery. It wasn't the same without him next door, without him coming in at the end of the day, smelling of motor oil, to steal a cookie and kiss my flour-dusted cheek. I was in my 70s and I had earned my rest. I had invested wisely over the years, and with the sale of the business and our home, I was more than comfortable. I was wealthy, though I never thought of it in those terms. I had security, I had peace. I bought the brick house with the rose garden, a quiet place to spend my days. My life settled into a gentle rhythm of gardening, reading, and doting on my grandchildren. I had everything a person could ever want: a legacy of hard work, a family that adored me, and a heart at peace. The ghost of that girl in the yellow dress, the girl who was called an embarrassment, had long since faded. I had proven my mother and the world she represented wrong. I had won. Or so I thought, because the past is never truly gone. It's just waiting patiently for a door to be left unlocked. And one Tuesday afternoon, as I was pruning my prize-winning roses, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, a voice from a world I had left behind 64 years ago reached out and pulled me right back in. "Hello," I answered, my garden shears still in my hand. "Aunt Althea," the voice on the other end was a woman's, hesitant and thin like a frayed thread. Is this Althea Brooks? My name is Crystal Johnson. I'm Delphine's daughter." The shears slipped from my grasp and clattered onto the flagstone patio. Delphine, the name was a key unlocking a door in my mind I had bolted shut decades ago. A flood of images rushed through, Delphine painting her nails, Delphine's tinkling laugh, Delphine's casual cruelty. Crystal, I vaguely remembered Delphine had married a few years after I left and had a child. This was her, a woman of 55 by my calculations, a stranger who shared my blood. I sank onto a nearby garden bench, my legs suddenly weak. Yes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. This is Althea. Oh, thank God, the woman, Crystal, breathed, a wave of relief in her voice. I found your number through, well, it took a lot of searching. I hope you don't mind me calling out of the blue like this. How did you find me? I asked, my mind racing. How does a ghost from 60 years ago find your unlisted number? I hired someone, she admitted. A private investigator, please don't be angry, we are desperate. The word hung in the air between us, desperate. What do you want, Crystal? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She took a shaky breath. It's Mama, she said. It's Delphine, she's sick, Aunt Althea, she's very sick. She has congestive heart failure and diabetes. She can't work anymore, and I lost my job a few months ago. We're losing our house. The bank is going to foreclose next month. We have nowhere to go. I was silent. I listened to the birds chirping in my peaceful, manicured garden. I looked at my beautiful, sturdy brick house. And I thought of Delphine, the family beauty, the chosen one, now sick and destitute. The irony was a bitter pill. I'm sorry to hear that she is unwell, I said, the words formal and distant. We need help, Crystal pleaded, the desperation in her voice now raw and undisguised. I know we have no right to ask. I know there was a falling out a long time ago. Mama never talked about it much, just that you moved away. But your family, you're her only sister. Please, is there anything you can do? Your family, the words were like a slap. They were family when they cast me out. They were family when they called me an embarrassment. Now, 64 years later, when they were in need, they remembered we were family. I have to go, I said abruptly. I cannot talk about this right now. I hung up the phone before she could say another word. My heart was hammering in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I sat on that bench for over an hour, the sun dipping below the trees, casting long shadows across my perfect garden. The past I had worked so hard to bury had just been unceremoniously exhumed. The next morning, I called Robert Patterson, Robbie. He had been Joseph's best friend since they were boys and our family lawyer for over 40 years. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man who knew my whole story. He was one of the few people I had ever told about my graduation day. Robbie, I said as soon as he answered, I need to see you. He heard the tremor in my voice. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. When he arrived, I made him a cup of coffee and I told him about the phone call. He listened patiently, his steepled fingers resting on his chin, his expression unreadable. So the prodigal sister returns, he said dryly when I had finished. Or at least she sends her daughter to do her bidding, what a coward. What do I do, Robbie? I asked, my hands wrapped around my warm mug. My first instinct is to say no, to tell them they made their bed 60 years ago and now they must lie in it. A part of me, a dark part, wants them to suffer as I suffered. That's the hurt talking, Althea, he said gently. And you have every right to that hurt. They treated you abominably, you owe them nothing. Legally, morally, you owe them absolutely nothing. You could hang up the phone, change your number, and never think of them again, and no one could fault you for it. I nodded slowly. I know, but there's another part of me, the woman who built this life, the woman Joseph loved, the woman who raised good children. And that woman hears about an old, sick lady about to be put out on the street and she feels pity. Is that weakness? No, Robbie said, leaning forward. It's your strength. It's the thing they tried to beat out of you but couldn't. It's your grace. But Althea, grace and foolishness are two different things. He paused, his gaze intense. If you choose to do something, we do it on your terms, not theirs. We protect you. We protect your assets, your peace of mind. We don't just write a check. That's not help, that's capitulation. You've spent a lifetime building this fortress. You don't just lower the drawbridge because a long-lost enemy shows up at the gate with a white flag. His words cleared my head. He was right. I was not that scared 18-year-old girl anymore. I was Althea Brooks. I was in Contro. If I was going to face this, I would do it from a position of strength. I need to see her, I said, the decision solidifying in my mind. I need to look her in the eye. Robbie nodded slowly. All right, but I'm going with you, and we set the terms of the meeting. We are in charge, Althea, from start to finish. That afternoon, I called Crystal back. My voice was steady now, firm. I will agree to a meeting, I said, cutting through her stammered apologies for my hanging up. I will come to you. My lawyer will be with me. He will contact you to arrange the time and place. That is all. I hung up again, this time not out of panic, but out of purpose. The final chapter of this long, painful story was about to be written, and for the first time, I would be the one holding the pen. The drive to Birmingham felt like traveling back in time. The highways were different, the cities along the way bigger, but the ghosts were the same. With Robbie silent and steadfast in the passenger seat, I felt like a general heading into a final, decisive battle. Robbie's paralegal had arranged the meeting. It was to take place not at Delphine's house, a place Robbie insisted we not go, but on neutral ground, a private room in a quiet, respectable restaurant. We arrived first. The room was small and paneled in dark wood. I sat at the table, my back straight, my hands folded calmly on the table in front of me. Robbie sat beside me, a leather portfolio in his lap. I was wearing a simple but elegant navy blue dress and a single strand of pearls Joseph had given me for our 25th anniversary. I felt composed. I felt powerful. A few minutes later, the door opened. A woman I recognized as an older version of the niece from the phone call, Crystal, pushed a wheelchair into the room, and in that wheelchair sat my sister, Delphine. The sight of her was a shock. This was not the vibrant, beautiful girl who had haunted my memories. The woman in the wheelchair was frail, shrunken. Her skin, once so fair and smooth, was sallow and blotchy with age spots. Her hair was thin and white, and her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. Her hands, which had once so expertly painted her nails, lay limp and swollen in her lap. The only thing that remained of the girl I knew were her eyes, and in them I saw a flicker of fear. Crystal wheeled her to the table. "Aunt Althea," she said, her voice trembling, "thank you for coming. This is my mother, Delphine." Delphine wouldn't look at me. She stared at her hands. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with 64 years of unspoken words. I decided to be the one to break it. "Hello, Delphine," I said. My voice was even, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. She flinched at the sound of my voice. Slowly, she lifted her head. Our eyes met for the first time since that horrible morning in 1961. The fear in her eyes was mixed with something else, a deep, profound shame. Tears began to well up and trace paths down her wrinkled cheeks. "Althea," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp, you look good." "I am well, thank you," I replied coolly. Crystal began to speak, launching into a rehearsed-sounding speech about her mother's medical problems, their financial situation, but Robbie held up a hand, gently but firmly stopping her. "Ms. Johnson," he said to Crystal, "we are aware of your situation. That is why we are here. But before we discuss any potential solutions, I believe your mother has something she would like to say to her sister." All eyes turned to Delphine. She swallowed hard, her frail body trembling. "He's right," she rasped. "Crystal, honey, could you give us a minute?" Crystal looked hesitant, but a glance from Robbie had her nodding and quickly exiting the room, closing the door behind her. It was just us, the two sisters, the beautiful one and the ugly one, the chosen one and the cast-out one. The roles, it seemed, had been cruelly reversed by time. "I was so jealous of you," Delphine said, the words tumbling out in a rush as if she was afraid she'd lose the courage to say them. "All those years, I was so jealous." I just stared at her, uncomprehending. "Jealous?" I said, the word tasting like nonsense. "Of what? You were the pretty one. You were the one Mama loved." "She didn't love me," Delphine said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "She loved the idea of me. She loved showing me off. It was a prison, Althea. I had to be perfect all the time. One wrong step, 1 pound gained, one pimple, and I would feel her disappointment. But you were free. You had a strength inside you. I saw it. It scared Mama, and it scared me. You had a spine. She always said you were stubborn, but it was strength. When you left, I was relieved at first, but then." I watched you go and I knew you'd be okay. I knew you would build something good. And I was stuck there with her having to be her perfect dolls. She wiped at her tears with a trembling hand. WH. At we did to you on your graduation day, it was the cruelest thing I have ever done. It has haunted me, Althea, every day of my life. I was a coward, I was weak. I let Mama's poison seep into me. I am so, so sorry. Her apology after all these years was not the triumphant moment I might have imagined. It was just sad. I looked at this broken old woman and I did not feel the sting of victory. I felt a profound sense of release. The anger, the bitterness that I had carried like a stone in my heart for so long began to dissolve. She wasn't a monster. She was just a weak, frightened person who had made a terrible choice. I accept your apology, Delphine, I said quietly. Robbie then cleared his throat and opened his portfolio. Althea is a compassionate woman, he said, his voice businesslike but not unkind. She is not going to see her sister put out on the street. However, she will not be taken advantage of. He then laid out the plan. I would not be giving them a lump sum of cash. Instead, I had arranged to pay off the remaining mortgage on their home. The deed would be transferred into a trust, which I would control. They could live there for the rest of Delphine's life rent-free. I would also set up a monthly stipend paid directly to a service to cover her medical expenses and a weekly grocery delivery. There would be no direct cash exchange. It was a solution that was both generous and sensible. It provided for her needs without sacrificing my own security or peace. Delphine looked at me, her eyes wide with a gratitude so immense it was painful to watch. Why? She whispered. After everything, why would you do this? I thought for a moment. I looked at my hands, the hands that had baked 1,000 cakes, that had held my husband, that had raised my children and grandchildren. Because my mother taught me that family was a transaction, I said, and my life taught me that she was wrong. This isn't for the woman you were, Delphine. This is for the woman I have become. I stood up. The meeting was over. I had faced the ghost of my past and had not flinched. I had closed the circle. My triumph wasn't in her downfall or in my ability to save her. It was in the quiet, unshakable knowledge of my own worth, a worth that had nothing to do with her or my mother or anyone else. It was mine, forged in fire and built to last. I walked out of that room with Robbie by my side and I did not look back. I was going home, to my garden, to my life. I was free.